Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Coming Out Stories from India series. Coming out. What is it? Coming out is a term used primarily in the LGBT community when a queer person shares about their sexual orientation, usually with friends and family. Nicola and I decided to launch these coming out stories from India to ensure we all work together in changing the narrative. The last few years, since my own coming out, I've been looking for role models, stories that can help me in my own journey. There was hardly any. And if at all, not in depth enough. There's a common thread running across the narratives, though. The journeys have mostly been extremely challenging. However, we also discovered that not all stories are that of pain, suffering, and trauma either. Our coming out stories from India started taking shape as we started discovering that we do need role models, to bring to our audience real people with their real stories, lived experiences, keeping in mind the unique complexities of India. Hopefully, these coming out stories will help and pave the way for those who are in any phase of their coming out journey. I'm Raga Olga De Silva, or Totally Out Now, as you know me. Let me tell you about our guest today. I was tempted to read his profile, but this profile is so intense and so amazing. So I thought I will share a little bit differently. Our guest today is someone I met virtually. Yes, 2020. He was a host at a festival that we were speaking at, and then later we were both hosting a session for Bright Circle for their book launch equally. I instantly took to him. I loved his energy. When I love somebody's energy, I stalk them. So I stalked him. I found his vibe so positive, and it's a bonus that he loves dogs, that he's smart, he's intelligent, he's extremely experienced media broadcaster, and look at how gorgeous he is. Please join me in welcoming Shivraj Parshad.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very well, as well as one can be with this pandemic around us, but got the COVID, recovered, and now doing everything virtually until I know it's safe to go out.
Gosh, you got the COVID, and wow, I don't know about it. But good to see you in action, and good to see you looking happy, and good to see you smiling. And are those dimples? Yes.
Yes, two dimples.
See, I told the audience I've got someone really gorgeous today. So Shivraj, I'm just really looking forward to this conversation with you. Just tell me, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Calcutta. I was born in the 70s in a Calcutta, which is very idyllic. And it was very post-colonial. So my parents were both working. My mother part-time because she wanted to be at work when we were in school. My father was a typical what we call a boxwala, which is went in the 50s to work with corporates that were partly Anglo-owned and then transitioned to local families. And so he managed companies for the Marwadis, which are the local businessmen of Calcutta. And he became a managing director working up the ladder. I had two much older sisters, 10 and 9 years old, and I was always described by my parents as an afterthought, by my sisters as a mistake. They always said you were found in the post box. But that was just them bullying me in their own loving way. And we had a very idyllic growing up and bringing up. We went to good Jesuit schools, so that's why I have a clipped English accent. My parents were very protective. They were also very particular about the yes please, no thank yous, and all the correct, you know, pronunciation and mannerisms. And my sisters grew up very independent, and by the time I was 12, they'd both gone off abroad, which is very unheard of in the early 80s. Went on their own merit. They got financial aid and went off to America to study their respective fields. And I was left alone for about a year and a half. And then I was packed off to boarding school. So that's my upbringing in a nutshell. Very idyllic. I grew up with dogs and animals around me. Went to a lovely day school where we had Anglican teachers, very dedicated. Had friends who were very natural. And Calcutta is a city, unlike other cities in India, where you're loved more for the less you have. It's about being a good human being. It's about being someone who connects with people. And I think that's where the connection and the ability to warm up to people came from.
So you grew up in Calcutta. Sorry, I didn't know that about you either. So wonderful to hear. But tell me your family environment. So you said that you had two older siblings, two sisters, mom and dad quite, both working. So I'm assuming quite liberal in their thinking, because those days when people went out to work, they obviously were very open-minded, right? Because the exposure was quite different. So in that kind of an environment, how would you consider your physical environment, your emotional, mental environment in that social structure?
It was very laid back, very warm. Because a lot of families, like my parents' families, who were all living in Calcutta away from their families or where they came from. So we became like extended families. So friends became families. The only problem in my case was because I came so much after, the peers that existed were very few and far in between, where there were some families that had afterthoughts like me. So I had my own friends, but the way we grew up, I was brought up by a nanny. I had dogs. We had a cook. We had a butler. We had a cleaning person, and we lived in these colonial bungalows. So we lived on the first floor of this colonial bungalow, built in 1905,
Wow.
and we had these very high ceilings and French windows. And I remember our drawing room had kind of these bay window French windows, and we looked out onto a street. We lived on a street called Lee Road. Perpendicularly, we had a road called Bishop Lefroy Road, and the house that was on the corner was where Satyajit Ray lived.
Oh, wow.
So, so when he died, his cortege, we saw it, kind of being taken away. And, that's the thing about Calcutta. Whether you were a celebrity or an ordinary person, it didn't matter as long as you're a good person. So, you go to so Saturday was a ritual in the market. My mother would go and I would tag along, and you'd see celebrities, but they'd all be in their rubber chappals, and we'd be going and shopping and doing your weekly provision, buying there. And what's nice about Calcutta is that kids could even go out on the streets. So it was very safe. It was very protected. You had the Anglo Indians, you had the Jewish community, you had the Muslim community, you had us, the outsiders. Unlike other cities where outsiders are looked as outsiders, we were just always just welcomed and incorporated. So it was a very sheltered upbringing, a very proper upbringing. And I think that was just so nice.
So where does Parsad, right? Parshad, where
Yes,
does it come
Parshad.
from? Where-
So my father's family came to Delhi in the 17th, 18th century. They were traders, and they settled here and were one of the first families of Delhi. So if you look at them historically, 1848, they were very, very large benefactors of local schools and giving, and they built their home and corporate kind of setting in Delhi. So when Shah Jahan came and set up the city of Shah Jahanabad, they're one of the Hindu families that settled here. So they come from a family called the Lala Rai Chunnamal family. So I still have my ancestral home in Old Delhi. It's falling apart. It's this huge mansion in the middle of commercial chaos. And my father grew up in this joint family, massive joint family, where my grandfather was what we call a brown sahib. He liked the good stuff. He was brown nosing with the British, and so our family post 1857 became very British, pro British. So they were given a lot of of respect. They got the Lala Rai label. So when my father finished from the Doon School and St. Stephen's, my grandfather said, "Oh, do you want to go to Oxford or Cambridge?" And my father's the family accountant had already told my father no money. So, living up to appearances, like the serial, where they
Mm.
had nothing. They were literally pawning off stuff to sustain the lifestyle. So my father said to him, "No, you know a lot of Anglo families. Can you put in a word and get a job in Calcutta?" He said, "You want a job? No one's ever worked in this family." And the reason why he did that was twofold. One, he wanted to get out of that trap. Second thing is, he'd already seen my mum in college, and she'd been swept off by her older sister who'd already gotten married to Calcutta, and he wanted to chase her there. Now, there's a very interesting story there. My father's family never accepted my mother because she was Sikh, and she came from a family that served in the Royal Army. My grandfather here, this is the house we live in, was a vet. So they weren't well off. So you know how that snobbery works? So I think Calcutta worked really well for them because there are many couples like them who eloped or got married. So they got married in the right way or whatever, but they lived in a different city. So that's where Parshad comes from. It's a very interesting background, but it comes with a lot of baggage. Because now as I realize, the fantasizing we did when we used to visit here, and my grandfather pampered me because I was the only grandson. It was all a fantasy because they had nothing, and my father and my mother made everything for themselves. So when they moved and retired to Delhi, and after my father's passing, I had to take on the mantle, and I go and I find a lot of debt. So I kind of did what my father did, compartmentalized up. We say we come from this great family, but we just pushed it aside and we made our own names by doing something or the other that made us stand on our own feet.
Sure, sure. So coming back to your childhood, thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting history, by the way, for a lot of us who don't really know the history, right? But coming back to you, when you were growing up, when you were a kid, did you find yourself being different, or did you just knew that this is who you are? And I'm making a reference to the whole coming out story, okay?
Absolutely.
Because you do look cute, is the word I would say.
I was a pretty boy then as well.
so, so growing up, did you have any kind of comments made at you at school, for instance, or did you come back home and did your parents say anything to you?
so,
I just don't understand. Yeah.
Raga, what's interesting is because Calcutta is such a non judgmental space, my friends never, because growing up till at least I was about 11, I was in Calcutta. But coming back to your original question, I think I always knew. Listen, I gravitated towards women friends, girlfriends from the age of 2. I was not comfortable with any boyfriends because they were rough and tough and tumble. So I was a bit of a standoffish person with boys, but with girls, I warmed up to them and I played with dolls. So I always knew I was different. I was a little feminine, I think, but I didn't. So that became something I always try to avoid while growing up. But there have been instances like my sister's boyfriend, who's now a husband, who I love almost like a brother, did call me namby pamby, did make me learn sports, but I wasn't good at sports. I was more of a homebody. I was a little, I always knew, right? Deep down inside, But I think the expectation, the markers around you, the culture, because you don't see people like that, you internalize it as meaning, no, I'm not like that. And so till I was at least 11, it didn't matter who I was because I grew up in a lovely city with warm people. But somewhere I knew that at least physically, as I started reaching the pre-adolescent phase, that there was an attraction to men, but I never acknowledged it. I never acknowledged it.
So when you were in that stage, that phase, 11 years old is very, very young. I mean, at that time, things are different now, of course, because people know everything about everything thanks to phones and Google and stuff.
Yeah.
At as young as 5 or 6. But at that time, when you were growing up, when you say that I always knew, I want to know, what did you always know? And then how did you find out that what you knew was fine to know
Or not fine to know.
or not fine
So,
to know? Yeah.
yeah. So, I did this project once, which is called MSM. So in the not-for-profit sector, it's called Men Have Sex with Men and deny that they are on the sexual spectrum. So I think as a young kid, you always encounter men who see a pretty young boy. So I know I was physically, I wouldn't say abused because it was mutual. So I had that situation. And I don't want to get too deep into it because it's an uncomfortable thing. And then my father's best friend, who worked with the Tatas in Jamshedpur, also like my father, had an afterthought, who's now a big Bollywood, Hollywood designer and stylist. And whenever I went and when I went to Jamshedpur and spent time, he was very flamboyant. And I think he was super courageous. He was out. And I think at a very young stage, because he went to, I think, boarding school a year before me, he kind of did come out. His siblings gave him a hard time. So I'd already encountered what it means at some level. And when he did that, I knew that that was something, and he used to always tease me and say, come on. And his mother being this mad Parsi woman, so Parsi being Zoroastrian, coming from a family her brother's a well-known Channel 4 writer, I will not take names, in the UK. She used to use the word, if I may, Gandu. So he used the word Gandu, which is a slur for homosexual, but Parsis are very irreverent as a term of endearment. And so I remember using it by mistake with a servant and getting whacked on the head by my mom saying, "Do you know what it means?" So I knew that she knew, and this little fellow was. So all those signs were there around me. So I knew, but I didn't want to know. It's kind of that denial, that internalized worry that you would be different and therefore judged.
Okay, interesting. So why did you not want to know? Because you felt you were different and you felt that you would be judged. And where did that reference come from, thinking that you would be judged?
So my father was your is a typical, he had this lovely deep baritone voice. So if my girlfriends ever called, they're like, "Who is that?" He was a man's man, but a very warm, welcoming person. I knew my trajectory in life. I knew that the day I was born, a telegram went to the Doon school, the boarding school I went to, saying son is born. I knew my fate was sealed. I was going to go to an all male boarding school. I'd seen what it entailed because the way he was backslapping with his friends and their sons telling me to get out of the room, being very, cliquey. I knew that if I was going to make that transition, I had to be someone different. And at the same time, Raga, I didn't want to go. I was literally on my knees begging. But I was told the option was not going and going to boarding in the day school that was 5 minutes away from home. So literally, there was a very hard stop on me and my masculinity being a key focus of who I was going to be growing up.
How
So
interesting.
the dissonance was there. I may not have been mature enough to understand it, but it was there.
So there was pressure of you as a boy, I would say, as a male child, right? That's what I'm
Yeah,
trying. Yeah,
youngest, the only male child,
yeah.
born after 10 years of having the first two, the expectation,
Wow.
all
So
that
so
was there.
so then how old were you when you went to Doon school?
I hate thinking about it, but I was 12. And what was really tough is that I was forced to jump a year. So, when you move from your fifth form to your sixth form, is when you make that switch to middle to senior school, right? But I was told I had to skip sixth and move from fifth to seventh. Now, academically, I may not have been a super bright kid, but I was always someone that teachers loved and I reached a certain level. But to jump from East India to North India to a different syllabus and jump a whole form. So I was made to do tuition for 2 years. I was made to go through the rigmarole. And then the expectation was there was no option but to get it.
How was time? How was your life at Doon school? That's a young age, right? At 12, you're discovering yourself and you are at a school that you really don't want to be at.
It
So
was
how was
horrific.
that?
Yeah. It was horrific. Can I tell you that for me, it was like Alcatraz? So I'm just going to jump a few years ahead to my last exam in the Indian school certificate, which is like your GCSE A level. I literally finished the political science paper. I put down a pen, the invigilator took away my paper. I literally flew out of the auditorium. We had a basketball courts under the auditorium where we gave our exam. And I said, "Freedom from Alcatraz." And I booked my train ticket 48 hours after that paper. Now, my best friend was very upset because, when you finish a paper and some other folks have still got time, you normally all congregate and stay there because that's when you're in that twilight years where you're finishing your exams, but you're not in school, but you're in school and everyone's partying. But my goal was to leave.
And why
Six
so?
years of hell.
Wow. And hell because of the studies or hell because of
I didn't
what?
fit in. I went to a school that was atypically the diametric opposite of this kind of upbringing I had. They were jocks, they were politicians' sons, businessmen's sons. The atypical boarding school, public school, where everyone was valued and valorized for being masculine, great at sports, outgoing, tough, and all the things that I wasn't. And the other disadvantage was that all my father's schoolmates, kids, even the youngest, were all leaving when I joined. They were like 5 forms ahead of me. So my protection from the first year or two had gone. No one
Why
was
did you
looking after me.
why did you need protection? From what?
So luckily, by the time I came to the Doon school, physical bullying had pretty much been outlawed and monitored. And I luckily, so you know how you go to houses. I went to my father's house, third generation, the whole rigmarole, was one of the nicer houses, but we had jocks. And there was a lot of verbal and mental exclusion and abuse. Now, years later at alumni meetings, very few that I go to, I was in a group and a lot of people look at me, acknowledged one thing. You know how they do team selections during games? And then eventually that whole semester term becomes you being part of a league depending on your ability. I would never be chosen. The captain would come to me last, and there'll be like two, three of us stragglers, and they'll be like, wait it out. So that was a kind of exclusion. And it was done overtly, subtly, at every level. And it's very interesting. The kind of person you see who I am now wasn't the person I was then. I had a housemaster who actually gave me a hard time and became a friend later, who used to write in my report, because he's also my teacher, not outspoken enough, not participatory enough. You know, I felt like saying to these people, have you ever thought that perhaps there was something wrong? Did you check in with the child? Because if you had checked in and if someone had given certain kids a chance, they would see that they would perhaps flourish a bit more.
So, what did you think was holding you back? Why were you not outspoken enough?
So, one, I was unhappy, very innately and overtly unhappy. So, the homesickness in the first 6 months transferred to I was not good enough in sports. I was called a pansy. Um, when I moved to the main house, because so you know, you spend 1 year in what is called a holding house, you're protected a bit and you make your friends, and then you go to a main house. I was ragged very overtly for being pretty and not having hair enough. And it impacted me. And so I did stuff like I would bury myself in music and books. So I'd go, we have this beautiful theater, amphitheater called the Rose Bowl, who was legendary, built by the boys of the 40s and 30s, the original batches. So I would go there to this amphitheater and spend time there. I would try and do theater. So all the atypical signs. And people would basically say I wasn't man enough. And I just didn't like the boys I went to school with. They weren't the boys I went to school with in Calcutta. They weren't nice, they weren't genuine, and I'm sorry to say, came from big business houses, politicians twisting the rules, doing things that my father had legendary said the dude school didn't stand for. So there were a lot of corners cut, and I just was innately. I swear, if I opened up the inland letter forms, these blue forms that we were mandatory writing every week to our parents, the first thing was, how are Sherry and Vodka, my Labradors? So when do you think I can be, when can I come home? And I literally was blackmailing my parents, and my father would always write back and say, come on, son, man up. And come on, son, give it a chance. Or just be very stern and say, grow up. So this man up thing grated with me.
Sure. So, when you were ragged at school, did you have anyone to go to? Could you go to your school masters and tell them, or the principal, or the dean?
No.
And nothing. So you had to just manage and suffer this
So,
on your
there's
own.
that unwritten code in boarding schools that you don't tell.
Gosh, it sounds like a prison, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, but public schools are. I mean, you look at, remember the books we read as kids of these public schools and the Billy Bunters and things, are awful bullies. Um, so, Raga, what happened was that when you're in an all male boarding school, it's like prison, right? So, when I was in my eighth form and you sexually discover yourself, I did get caught. So, what that means is I was fooling around with someone, and my batchmates, so our house, my batch, 6 people, caught us in the loop. So, I find myself surrounded in the study of what we call the toy with an E at the end. So, British public school. And I was told if I ever did that again, I would be reported. And my best friend's face turning away broke my heart. You know what he said to me? He said, Shivraj, if I'm seen with you, people will think we're doing it. So please stay away from me. What happened was that someone in that group of 6 broke the tenet of not talking. And that someone is a very prominent businessman now, married to a very prominent Bollywood star's daughter, whose marriage is on the rocks. I'm sorry I'm being bitchy, but he went and told everyone. So it spread like wildfire. And so there's this tradition in boarding school called the midterms. So up till your eighth form, you are supervised, and the entire batch goes with your tutor. So it's a tutorial system to a trek at the end of midterm, which is your, it's a 4 month term. With the 2 month, you go for a trek. When you graduate to senior forms, that is your ninth form and above, you're expected to now choose your group, work on a budget, and plan your route and get approval and go. No one wanted to go with me.
Gosh. So you were
I
alone.
begged. No, I was. So it was mandated I go on a group. So what happened was that my housemaster found a group, a mixed group of senior and junior people, and then we went on a midterm. So it was a joke, right? These are the rejects, a lot of them, or for some reason they weren't going with others. And we went for whitewater rafting in Rishikesh. Beautiful, and I'm a water baby. I was having fun. One evening, I was surrounded in a fire, a ring of shame. The others were friendly. Some of them are still dear friends of mine. And this one guy singles me out, makes me stand in the middle, and he's like, "You're homo, right?" I'm like, "Sorry." He's like, "You're homo. Can you change a light bulb or even do electrics or electronics?" That typical nasty. And I swear, Raga, this guy is now fated at society in Delhi because his wife is, with the UN and very famous. And I've said to my sisters and anyone who knows him that he's one of two people that if and I don't care if I'm held liable, if I saw on a lonely road and I was in a car, I would run him over. That's the level of hate. Because the other guy, who's also a prominent family son, who ironically we all went to boarding school, so everyone's connected, was connected to me through family. There was a roll call every Sunday because Sundays were when guardians would come and take you out. So we had to line up to the main building and roll call. He would do stuff like pull down my tracks or and say homo faggot. So can you imagine the kind of internalized homophobia? This is something you've talked about. So that entire experience meant that even though I liked boys, I sometimes had boys hit on me because boys like pretty boys. It was a bad thing. I was a bad person. So now you can understand why I never spoke up in class, why I wasn't my own self. Why years later, when I'm at dinner with my best friend and his wife, and I asked the wife, because I have two boys, will you send them to school? She said, no. I said, are you worried that they might turn out like Uncle Shivraj? She's like, I will slap you because I hope they do. I'll be proud of them. My best friend turns to me and says, I'm really sorry, I love you, and I put you through that. We were stupid teenagers. It was heartbreaking because it took me from 15 to almost 17 before I turned it around. So when you're in your last year, you are kingpin. Suddenly, I became beloved of a lot of young folks in my house. My best friend and I were a duo who went around being silly. But I only reached there because I reached at the end of the game and no one could bully me, right? I became almost 30% of the person I am today. Almost. But I didn't.
So
That
imagine.
place, I'm sorry, but that place took away the most formative years. And my father believes, and I used to tell him that he was guilty of it. And I'm sorry, I love him very much, and I don't want, because he's no longer here to defend himself, but it was true, and I've always maintained that, and I've always been a very angry person about that. I
I
know
mean,
it's opened doors for me, but you know what? I don't wish that on anyone.
no, I mean, I don't wish it on anyone either. I'm just listening to you. I'm feeling so teary because, when you look at you, Shivraj, I mean, nobody would even guess or even imagine. And I'm going to use the word trauma that you've been through. I mean, that's traumatic in your formative years when you should be flourishing, enjoying like all the other boys were. Here you were all alone and going through something, and there was no one to turn to. Like your family was asking you to man up. I want to come to that now. So when did your family understand that that had nothing to do with manning up, that you were a sensitive person who was different? Now, so did that take them time, or did they even understand, or did you have to tell them?
No, so I think they understood. Uh, it was just this social expectation that he must go to Dune school and go through the process because I did. I became this man. I have great friends and relationships because I went to. This is about the old boy network, right? And then the expectation was I would graduate to university and follow in his footsteps, which I did. And thankfully, in the 90s, Delhi University, St. Stephen's, sorry, Silver Spoon, was a very different place. But by then, I had internalized all the things that happened to me. So I wasn't going to deal with it. I was this fun person, sensitive, talkative, out there, had really good girlfriends because I was in English honors. Nobody judged you in college. It was a free space. Sometimes the girls would joke and say you're bisexual, right? And I'm like, ha ha ha. But I was here in Delhi fending for myself. My father again said, I do not want you coming back to Calcutta because if you come back to Calcutta, you'll have the driver at your disposal. You'll be a namby-pamby, man up. And it's like, whatever. So I took buses. I had 500 rupees a month, which wasn't much at the time, to manage my stay, my books, my travel. I refused to take the accommodation in college, which is foolish in hindsight because it was a great space, but because I saw the beds and all the memories of boarding school came back. So I lived like a nomad. I went from sister to grandparents. I lived in Old Delhi for a bit, and then I came to this house, which is my maternal side, ground floor, living there, and I really fended for myself. And I came into my own. But the 90s was very different. You could never explore that side. It's early 90s, right? 92 to 95. So my focus was how do I have fun? Then you got to that stage where you're grappling with what do I do with my life? I wasn't sure. The expectation again was MBA, banker, all the typical route. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be a journalist because I suddenly saw the blooming of Indian news on the public broadcast by a private network. So it was news track, and then suddenly NDTV had bulletins. And I had a friend whose cousin was there, and she said they're looking. And Calcutta, being a very small network, Pranoy's parents were friends of my parents or my aunt and uncle. So my first job interview was a cropper. I didn't get that job. So I was trying to get in. And so, those years was great because I was doing it on my own. And I managed to somehow scam the system and get to Pranoy. And they offered me a job. And I went to Calcutta for 3 months because I wanted to satisfy my father and worked at a bank for 3 months as a trainee. I came back and I joined NDTV. And I joined a production house of 60 of us where I was told women work better than men. So it was already, the context was really clear. So suddenly at the back of mind, I'm like, wow, this is an open space. But I'll come to the dichotomy later. And I flourished because I worked really hard. We worked 16 hours. I went and opted to be a producer on the morning show, first ever breakfast show. I'd go in at 2:30 in the morning, sometimes come back at 10. Work was fun. So all those issues were parked to the side. And also, I'm going to be very open. And I had my first sexual encounter at 19, proper one, not fooling around, in college with someone from school who had already fooled around with. So that was parked. And I didn't have anything because I was work. It was me. But yes, I was a pretty boy. So I did feel a little like being hit on sometimes. And I liked it, but I used to also publicly shun it. So that was me. And I worked really hard till at least around 2000.
So, how was the scene in Delhi at that time? You're talking about the early 90s. We're talking about the gay scene, the queer scene. At that time, the word queer wasn't around, right? So, the gay scene, how was it? And how did you meet or date people those days?
I never was in the queer scene. But what was very interesting, Raga, is when you say that, there was a lovely person who joined NDTV. I think we joined in 95 and he joined in 97. And he's a fated filmmaker in America. Jihad for Love, Parvez Hussain Sharma. He's now, you know. So Parvez was there. Was openly gay. And I could see the judgment from people and the disgust and the snide remarks. So I would always say, I'm not. But we used to always hang out together. And he's like, Shivraj, come on. And I wouldn't. But I still went out with him. The only place I went to, house party, was this very nice person. And can I give you his name? Because you and I met at his festival, Sharif Rangnekar, who was
Oh,
in. So Sharif was a journalist, and he used to have these parties where there was all these boys, some very very nice people who are very dear friends of mine. And Sharif is inspirational friend of mine. And I used to stand behind Parvez and go, I'm not gay, I'm just here with Parvez. So that was my only brush. And then stories of what Parvez did, the conquests and things. And then Parvez left in a huff in 2000, or before that, in 99, saying this is a homophobic space, NDTV is not open, he wasn't allowed to do stories, and he went off to America. And so that was my only brush with the queer community.
interesting. So, in that, sorry, I'm going to interrupt. So, in that time, did your parents ever put pressure on you to marry or bring a girl home?
So my parents saw me being very busy all the time. The issue did sometimes come up, And I have to admit, I did date a few girls. Um, Not date, but I had a lot of girlfriends, so they assumed, right? I had more girlfriends than boyfriends from work. So I was the only guy in my group of the girls who joined with me. So the deal was that we'd go out partying, and I had to drop everyone, chaperone, and I'd be the last one driving back home. And so my parents never really asked. Liberal family, so I think the cutoff date was perhaps 30, and I'll come to by coming up by then. So it was very laid back, and no one really asked or probed or got personal. So I had sisters who had kids, they were growing up, I was a favorite uncle, and so on and so forth. I was very busy, I'd do these crazy shifts, I'd be on telly, so I was fated, and my parents would be proud of me. I'd interview Benazir Bhutto, Vladimir Putin, because by then I'd really reached a stage, and I think somewhere that also was my way of telling people I went to school with, you know what, Sonny, I made it. I made a space for myself. So I really was very absorbed there. My parents just went with the flow to a certain point.
And at that point, did they ever? I mean, this pressure of being a male child in India is so huge, and I've had friends from the community who said that every second day their parents would tell them about getting married. That's the pressure you have to take. You have to procreate after all, right? That's your role.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't get that kind of sustained pressure, but you'd get those subtle hints.
So
And so
go.
it's very interesting because you internalize all that, right? And what happens is, because I like women a lot. Okay, it's a really weird thing, but I swear, Raga, I still have crushes on women. But it's not a physical thing. It's from here. Uh, so by about 97, 98, 99, the girls in my group were like, "Ugh, you cannot be like this." And so there was this girl who joined in the technical team. And I think I fancied her and she fancied me. So we used to hang out at lunch, and these girls engineered something. Suddenly on my birthday, bouquet came, and they're like, "Ooh, Gorika gave you flowers." And so I asked Gorika out, and she jumped at the opportunity, and we started dating. So everyone's happy. Shivraj dating a girl. And I'd do stuff like go with her to Gurgaon to her brother and sister-in-law, and they'd come back from Austria, so they were running a business of Sakatot cakes, and so now I'd help label, and we were very close. So 6 months into dating, she asked me the $1 million question. Come on, do you like girls or boys?
Oh wow.
And I tell you why she asked that question. Because she went to a boarding school.
I
And
get it.
you can understand what happens in boarding schools, right? And she luckily went to a mixed one, but there are girls and girls and boys and boys. And so she said, out with it. And this was the millennial year from 1999 to 2000. So we were dating till 2000 and the turn of the year. And she sat me down. And I still love her a lot. I wish I'd see more of her, but we had that kind of relationship where we could tell each other anything. So there are a lot of things that we told each other that I can't, for public consumption, discuss. Everything, everything. And so in that moment, I'm like, I think I like boys more. And she hit me on my head and she's like, Shivraj, you're well loved and you're well liked. What is your problem? So I'm like, I don't know. I just fear I'll disappoint people. And she's like, I love you. People love you. What the hell is your problem? Just deal with it. And so I said, okay, I like boys. So she said, will you make me a promise? Will you now go out there? Okay. Very reluctantly, I'm like, So online, I just started those chat applets. So I started. But I didn't want to meet anyone. I was very shy. I was like, anonymity, what the hell is this? What happened was that I decided to take a gap year, a mid-career master's. And guess what I did? I chose the University of Sussex in Brighton, the gayest of gay colleges with the biggest LGBT community in the UK, to go do my master's in international relations. I think I did it knowingly. And because I covered diplomat missions and diplomacy, the British High Commission said nicer climate. They did everything out of town. I got the visa, everything. And I went. And I'd broken up with Gorika. But that didn't matter because I'd done a lot of stuff. And then the Agra summit happened. And just before the Agra summit was my first encounter with someone online. I met the person and it ended up in bed. Now, I didn't know what to do. It never happened to me, but it happened. And then the guy decided to what we in Gen X or Gen Z terms call ghost.
Yep.
I didn't know what that meant. So can you imagine? I'd taken that leap of faith. I'd hooked up with someone, which I didn't understand was a hookup, because I came from a heteronormative, as the academic law people say, and I was heartbroken.
Ghosted. And you were ghosted.
Oh, I thought it was great. And so we went to the Agra summit, and it was a very busy time, being very upset that this happened to me. And after the Agra summit in 2001, I was going off to England to get in, and then I had a few more encounters. And it was a bit weird because I discovered later in hindsight that a bunch of them were all married men, and it was a group of them, and they knew about it, and it's just icky. So I went off. And so I posted a blog recently declaring that I'm a coming out coach. And one of my friends from university wrote, "Hey, but I still remember the young boy walking up to me outside the library and saying he was gay." And I'm like, "Dan, I hadn't actually come out. I came out 3 years later, but I had become so free when I got to the UK. I was talking about it. So my girlfriends in the course, Charlie and Charlotte, decided that they wanted me to go to the LGBT meetup. And I'm like, no, no, no. So Charlie said she was bisexual, which I knew was a lie later on because she wanted to chaperone me. So we went. And to be honest, Raga, I didn't like it because the boys were to camp and the girls were to butch. So all that stereotype that you're fed, the internalized homophobia, all that judgment came up. So while I was doing my course, and I'm going to put this out there and I'm going to be judged, I went to bathhouses. I met men. I explored. I finished. And because I was duty bound to come back to NDTV, I came back and I was a new me. By then, that family friend whose youngest son had come out, was already with his French partner, had to come back because at the States his visa, so he's living in Bombay, was visiting for a film, and a bunch of friends told him, take Shivraj out. So I went to the hotel to meet him. We went out for dinner. And then this friend of mine, she's like, Shivraj, I do not want you going home. You're going with him to the nightclub. So there was this wonderful nightclub called Pegs and Pints every Tuesday in Delhi. So I went with Arjun, and a famous designer was hitting on me. So there's me hiding behind this 6 foot good looking guy, saying, oh, Arjun, Arjun. And this guy was tenacious. He didn't leave till he got my number. And he was a very famous designer. So I go back to work the next day, and all the anchors and friends of mine were like, Shivraj, we need to be dressed by him. Just go. I'm like, you're pimping me. They're like, no, 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 no. He's good looking. You're good looking. So that evening, the whole production was getting me dressed. And there was all this show us. And, you'll wear a turtleneck and you'll do this. And no, 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 this. And go have a haircut. So I got ready and literally left the gate. And I sent him a text. Those days only text work. Said, my niece is getting married and I have to go for a wedding. So I chickened out.
You Shivraj. Oh no.
And so my coming out was still a little way off. So I did go to Pegs and Pints every Tuesday. It became addictive and I started bumping into people I knew. So apart from Sharif, another journalist I used to meet in the courts who's a very dear friend of mine, much older. And so Tuesday nights, no matter what shift I was on the next day, even if I was a 6 a.m. shift, even if I was anchoring the next day, so you had to be pretty, I still went. And it only began after 11. And then I found myself in this public space. But remember, it was still not me out. It was me living this dual life, but I enjoyed it.
And then what happened? This is like I'm waiting for something to happen. Shivraj should do something, and suddenly he doesn't do it.
So, it was this very weird thing, right? For public consumption, I was perhaps bi. But in private consumption, physically, I was only attracted to men, right? So I was in denial. You can identify, right?
Yeah.
So I had this girlfriend at work that ended. And then I had an encounter with someone at work. Now, this is very weird thing, which I now in public fora call sexual harassment, is when a gay man exists, he's not sexually available for everyone's pleasure, is he? But I was being hit on by many people. So I was a bit wary. But there was this one guy who was my typical type. I have a type. It's now diluted now, almost 50. But it was dark, swarthy, manly.
Milton
So this,
Mills.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But so he was someone in operations, and I think they had a bet of a conquest. I didn't know this till much later. So we did something foolish. My parents were in England. I was like, oh, this is coming out. Anyways, and then we behaved like nothing happened at work. So it happened for a week. And then one night on my landline, I get a call, and he says, would you mind being my man? I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, I want to go out with you and I want this to be more. I said, fine. And that was the first time I faced the prospect of having a boyfriend. So, cut to 2, 3 months, and it was a very weird situation. He wouldn't go out with me. He would go out only with friends. He would do weird stuff. Like, I remember I had to come down and fill for the sports desk as well as doing mine stuff because they'd gone for some cricket tour. And he used to be on the same floor. And he'd give me missed calls or call me on my extension and flirt with me. So, I finally said, dude, what is going on? Let's go out. So, we did go out and we went on a proper date, whatever. So, my confidence level had gone up. So, here's my coming out story, Raga. We have this beautiful veranda that looks out in a lot of trees, and we had a customary thing where my father would sit and read his newspaper. And if I was on a later shift, I would join, and the dogs would be there, and we'd be reading our papers, and we'd have that father-son thing. We always had that little bit of testy, but always a close relationship somehow. Very strange. I was a mama's boy that converted to telling my father anything. And so from his, picture this, from his newspaper, he goes, so when am I going to have Parshad grandchildren? And then paper goes down like this to check my reaction. So I'm like, don't you have 5 already? Population control? He said, no, but they're not Parshad grandchildren. I said, because my sister hadn't changed her name, the older one, because she's a career person. And I said, so they're Parshad grandchildren. He's like, no, you. Are you seeing someone in this baritone voice? Yes. Now, father son, testy relationship, always on edge, always a little on the combative state. He said, so when do we get to meet her? I'm like, it's not a her, it's a him. Not the best way to come out, Raga. But something inside me snapped and I said that.
Wow. And
Silence. Silence. 3-day silent treatment. On the 3rd day, playing with my dog, I'm sitting there and I'm in tears because what I've done is, in the interim, called up my boyfriend, or ostensible boyfriend, and I've had a howl. He's told me that he's going to meet me on a media night and all of us will go out partying, which is a typical MO he had. Always have the blanket of other people. Don't do this to me. Don't send me to my grave with your choices. And you know what I said to him? Papa, it's not a choice. It's who I am. Given a choice, I would rather be straight with a woman, married with kids. And believe you in me, Papa, I have a lot of women chasing me. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, it's not a choice. So stop calling it, my lifestyle choice or sexual choice. It is who I am. It's biological. He's like, oh, come on off it. I'm like, how can you say that? Your daughter's best friend is lesbian. We've grown up with you loving her more than a lot of other people. Your best friend's youngest kid is gay and out. So he kind of softened. And my sister, by then, the one who lives here, who I'm closer because of physical proximity, had already yelled at me. She's like, what the hell's wrong with you? You could have had a chat with me. I would have made you speak to Jabbar, that's her best friend who's lesbian. I'm like, why do I need to speak to another gay person to deal? You know? But, I come out, in hindsight, now that I'm a coming out coach, there's a process, there's a whole system of first loving yourself, and I wasn't loving myself, and then dealing with it. So, long story short, we went out on the media night. I'm cutting to my boyfriend, or ostensible boyfriend, and we went out after that, 11:30, to drop him home. And he said, we need to talk. What does that mean? It means he's ending it, right? And me, not used to it, taking the leap of faith, we drive there under his house. And he's like, quite understand, I'm not like you. I don't come from a rich family. Rich. I come from a middle-class, going Christian family. And my parents, I don't want to send them to their grave. So exactly what my father said, he heard it, right? I can't do this. I'm straight. I'm like, I was devastated. I was it broken. So I was driving back, and I called up my friends in England. I called up this childhood friend of mine, and of course he told me to shut up. I called up my best friend. He told me to shut up, grow up, and it was quite torturous because I kept trying, and then he started dating a girl just to spite me, and I started going out again, and I've had really shitty relationships since then. And I think the growth in my story ever since coming out has been the peace I've had living with myself, being happy with myself. That's the biggest challenge, I think. I'm being happy and content in who I am. I don't need another person to complete me. But if I find another person, it's not a compelling need. But I'm out. I've never felt the need to wear my sexuality in my sleeve. At NDTV, a liberal media space, I did feel the discrimination. So it was in subtle phases. So I was always given the rough shifts because I was single. I was always given the raw end of the stick because he doesn't need it. He doesn't have anyone. And there were always men who thought I was fair game.
Interesting.
And so I left. I left maybe impetuously. It's a great place. I mean, I lived there for 15 years. I grew there. So when I left Prannoy, I was like, you can't leave your family. And I'm like, cut to now. And this is a fact. And I don't care if I'm held liable. They've become very pro LGBT because their own adopted daughter came out. So it takes that for you to be able to open up. And she's the best friend of the person we were talking to before we began the show. And people are opening up about it, but there's still, so at editorial meetings, I had to fight for stories to go a certain way. They would shoot me down and say, we will not use the word queer, it's pejorative. I'm like, hello, the community has appropriated it. An entire literature and genre is named after queer. Like, get over it, they won't listen to me. So, anyways, long story short, I've grown since then, and I am who I am.
Such a beautiful story, Shivraj. And it's such an honest, the way you're just narrating things like with absolute honesty. I want to understand about your mother. Tell me, a mother always takes things so personally. I mean, your father did as well. But moms tend to think, I must have done something wrong. That, they always think that being queer is a disease. In most families, whether rich, privileged, not privileged. So, how was your mother's reaction and how is she now?
So, she and my father were always a unit. And so they did the typical Indian thing of never talking about it again, but not totally subduing it. Now, my sisters did this thing where they used to tell me stop being a mama's boy and be fixated by a mother and all that. So when I was much older, I kind of detached. But sometimes I remember her at that time passing phrase saying, "I think we always knew you were bisexual." So so she wasn't very judgmental. She's not like that. I think my parents weren't, uh, but we're not as close as I used to be as a child. I now So my father's dying wish, and this is again a burden I'm sorry no gay person should ever have to take on. Just because you're unmarried and you're gay, that you need to take the burden of looking after parents. It is an obligation. I love my parents. I will do it for till my dying day. But my father's death wish was that I look after my mother. So I moved back in. I'm here. I live with my 80-year-old mother. We have a love-hate relationship. She's a very intelligent woman who has seen a lot. She and I have our separate lives, but we live in the same house. And of course, I look after her. The expectation is I'm the caregiver, and which is fine. I mean, she made me. Uh, I only heard from my second sister, who later on told me at the time she was told, and they were told not to talk about it, not to be too open, because the social expectation. But it wasn't. It was just basically them not really acknowledging it. But they would talk about other people in the circle coming out and things. It wasn't very. I have to say I was privileged. I had two very intelligent, very open-minded parents. But I guess when it comes to your own, and so the funny thing is, 3 years ago, I know I'm digressing, but when my youngest niece, who's now in Oxford with a partner, sat down and said, Mamu, I'm seeing someone. So Mamu is the term used for an uncle of the maternal side. And I'm very close to my three girls because I literally brought them up. The eldest was when I was 16. So very, very close. I may not have given them material things, but time, and she's the most who looks like me, and she's doing her medicine. And she said, I'm seeing someone, but it's a girl. And my sister was there. And I'm going to see. So my sister's like, I'm so glad she's Indian. So apparently she had a very tough coming out because the person she was with was bisexual and left her very broken. So she met this girl who turned out to be a family friend's daughter. And the reaction was very different, the way even extended family. But there were murmurs, and it's very differently received. And I'm so proud.
Wow.
And my nieces are so proud in reciprocity. And I guess it's a generational thing. And I just did a podcast, and I think generationally also, I think there's a greater acceptance. But again, remember, we come from middle class, urban, educated, enlightened folk, so it is easier. And when I meet other folk, because people do talk to me, it's not the same experience. So I'm hoping my experience will give me a bit of a sure footing to be able to sit with people and work with them through what they go through.
Well, I don't know whether it is a generational thing, and that's my observation. I think it is about second generation thing. You sensitize them, and so the second generation could come out more easily, and that is why we do these coming out stories from India series, to have these stories, so that when people are like, when our families or future families listen to stories like that, we don't have to go through what you've been through. I mean, privileged or no privilege, you've been through stuff, Shivraj. I've been
I
through it.
still I still can't meet certain people from school, and my best friend keeps saying you're very judgmental. But now, as he gets older, he's seeing what I mean. But I made my peace with who I am, and the fun thing is, I love telling people now. I wouldn't wear myself. Now I'm like, who I am, and I'm proud about it. What's your problem? And I see a lot of these people who've become parents now, so they've softened up, but I'm not convinced. So I don't socialize, but when I do, I love talking about my boyfriends and my conquests.
I love it. I think,
And that's squirming a bit. And me being, I have the upper hand now. I'm not that boy you all picked on in the ring of shame.
but
I'm not.
this is a beautiful story. I'll tell you why. Because the audience watching, I want them to listen to this. The feeling of being liberated, isn't it, within ourselves, when we accept our own selves. That is the most important thing. That I feel that. I mean, 2 years only I've been out openly, publicly. What a feeling from not ever using the L word. I would not even say the L word, because I thought L meant lesbian. Lesbian meant, oh my God, that's me. I'm not that. To now
Same thing.
openly being who I am. I every word in the dictionary that is used for queer folks, I use, and I use it with pride, and I love it. And I have a partner of 15 years, and I stand next to her with pride, Shivraj, which I wasn't able to for years. And I really think I want to see you stand next to a partner with pride as well. And
If that happens, I'd be happy.
it
But
will happen.
I made my vision for my future where I see myself happy with a lot of dogs, and my coaching and my training and my podcasting presenting business. And if that happens, I mean, as I say, "Aapke muh mein ghee shakar," which is literally from God's mouth to your mouth to my ears. That's an added bonus, and I would be more than happy to welcome someone in my life. If it doesn't happen, from my 30s to now, where where's angst ridden about it, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm going to love a lot of people, and if someone loves me back enough to stick around because the last person broke me, um, literally broke me, I'll be happy. But if I don't want to go down that route again. I don't want to be broken again. I don't want to be that person who spent 2 years wondering what was wrong with me till I figured it was the other person. So I don't want to do that. So if I find someone who's not, and I know I found someone and I let that person go, my foolishness, and we joke about it because he has a boyfriend now, and we're very good friends. And he said to me, he said, "Don't let someone go again like you did me."
It will happen, Shivraj, when it is meant to, and with the right person. And
If
we
it's
all
meant
know
to.
that. Yeah, and we
If
all
it's
know
meant to.
that.
If it's not meant to, I'm happy being that man who, how people put that fear in you. What if you go old? What if you don't find anyone? No, I found someone.
Found you. You
Me.
found me. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's
A
it.
bunch of Dachshunds, a bunch of Labradors, a house somewhere not in India where I have an ocean or a river and my practice. If I find someone great, if I don't, I have many lovers. Hopefully, I can keep this body going. I'm nearly 50 and I look at my batchmates and go, uncle, I'm fine.
Okay. Okay. I am not ageist, but I'm shocked when you said you're 50, and we were trying to work it out,
No,
Nicola and I.
47.
Okay,
47.
see, nearly 50, no?
Nearly 50, 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I've decided to be stuck at 50. I came out at 50 and I'm always going to be 50. No more 51.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, golden years.
Yeah, golden years, and I'm always going to be golden. But this has been a fantastic
Thank
conversation.
you.
We've run out of time, but I just realized we've really run out of time. But I want to just tell the audience, listen, this is a coming out coach. Remember
Yes.
that. So if you want to, want any kind of advice, help, whatever, please reach out to Shivraj. What are your social handles? How do we reach you?
So on Instagram, I'm Shivraj.brevis podcast because that's my podcast. I'm Shivraj Parshad, as is written on the text there, full name at Twitter. Or you can write to me. I have a very simple email. It's shivraj@brevis.in. That's my
BRE.
Brevis, brevis for brevity. So I decided to start my consulting firm saying a lot of people in communication overspeak, keep it short. So it's brevis.in. So it's shivraj@brevis.in. And I'm more than happy to speak to folks and see how we can work together. If not, I can also refer you to other people. But I love connecting with people and seeing how we can work together.
Fantastic, Shivraj. Thank you so much for being here today. And
And thank you.
thank you. And I hope you like little gifts, scented candles, organic, sustainables. We've got a
I
partner,
love it.
Chotu hai, but we have a partner, the Herbal Theory.
Thank you.
They would love to send you something. And I
Oh,
must thank them and thank you, Nicola, for your support in the background and helping us bring this all together. I hope the audience have enjoyed this interaction. I have really loved it today. I learned so much. I'm going to write to the Dune School, for instance. And
oh. They've become a very liberal space because a lot of my nephews who come out of there, they're like, but Mamu, they call me Mamu because their fathers or their mothers grew up as siblings, and they're like, no, it's not an issue anymore. And I'm like,
well, you made it happen. So thank you. Thank you, audience. And write to us, please, at theviewsroom@gmail.com. And thank you for joining us. Remember, I can be reached at Facebook, Twitter, Insta, at Totally Out Now. My YouTube channel, where you'll get these such amazing stories, is at Raga Olga De Silva. One last thing, remember, closets are for clothes and not to hide your truth. Never forget that. Thank you very much. Signing out at Totally Out Now. You're watching Coming Out Stories from India, presented by The Views Room.